600,000 people go missing in the United States each year. Tens of thousands remain mysteriously missing.
Hi guys, welcome back to Mysteriously Missing. I'm Justine.
Hi, I'm Karen.
In today's episode, we have a special two-part edition for you guys. We're featuring Dorothy Harriet Arnold, who mysteriously went missing on December 12th, 1910, so over 100 years ago. And this will be part one. We are breaking it into two separate parts for you because it's a pretty big episode. So just tune in, this Sunday for part one, and then next week we'll have part two out for you. Now, a brief description of this case. On a cold morning in New York City, 25-year-old Dorothy left to go shopping. She was supposed to meet her mom for lunch at the Waldorf-Astoria hotel that day, but she never arrived, and she was never seen again.
Dorothy was described as a pretty young heiress. She was fluent in several languages. She was reported as 5'1" to 5'4", 140 to 160 pounds. She had dark brown hair and gray blue eyes. She was born on July 1st, 1885 in New York City, and she had a very wealthy family. She was the second of four children. She had an older brother, John. He was born in 1884. She had two younger siblings, Dan, who was born in 1888, and Marjorie, who was born in 1891. Her sister Marjorie was also known as Goggie, and she was 6 years younger than Dorothy. Marjorie would later marry a gentleman named George Lamonte, and her aunt Harriet was also prominent in the community, and she was married to a Supreme Court Justice, Rufus Peckman.
So now jumping into this timeline, on Dorothy's father's side of the family, they were descendants from England who arrived in America on the Mayflower, while Dorothy's mother, Mary Martha Parks Arnold, hailed from Montreal, Quebec in Canada. Her father, Francis Arnold, was a Harvard University graduate who was the senior partner of F.R. Arnold and Company, a company that imported fancy goods. He was an established perfume importer, and due to their social standing, the Arnold family was listed in the social register and had high social standing in New York City. They lived in a mansion on 108 East 79th Street in the borough of Manhattan, just 2 blocks from Central Park. Now, Dorothy attended the Velton School for Girls, and Velton was a private school in Manhattan and was located in a 5-story building on 192 West 74th Street. And Dorothy would walk about 1.5 miles across Central Park from their home to the school.
And that's a bit of a walk to school. And yet, 100 years ago, people walked everywhere. They walked, there weren't the vehicles. And so for her to walk across the park, and if you look at the map, she went from one side of Central Park, walked straight across to the Velton School for Girls. And
in that time, there was just about 2 million cars on the roads. So this was about America, 1950, right? Or about 1 for every 50 people. And the Model T was a hot commodity, but outside of a handful of cities, there weren't many places you could easily drive.
And Americans didn't drive, they walked, so.
Yeah. Now, the Velton School for Girls prepared girls for education at Wellesley, Bryn Mawr, Vassar, and Bernard, and other colleges. In addition to classrooms, it had an art department, study rooms, an auditorium, a library, and a gymnasium. It was particularly noted for its French language and art instruction in advanced classes, like physics, astronomy, and physiology.
And after the Velton School for Girls, Dorothy went away to Bryn Mawr, and that's located in Pennsyvlania, about 11 miles from Philadelphia. It's also 115 miles southwest of New York City, where she lived with her family, or about a 4-hour train ride in those days. Smart, strong women went to Bryn Mawr College to seek an unparalleled education and meaningful opportunities to contribute to the world. Bryn Mawr was one of the first institutions of higher education in the United States to offer graduate degrees, including doctorates, to women. Dorothy lived in the dorms there. So here's a woman that's on the cutting edge of women's rights. It's 1910. She's going to the best schools. She has the means from her family to do that. And Bryn Mawr is known, to fight for women's suffrage in those days, the right for women to vote in elections. And later on, the 19th Amendment granted women that right to vote, in 1920. So she's really at a, liberal college.
Right.
Getting a liberal education. So Dorothy majored in literature and language. She met George Griscom Jr. while attending Bryn Mawr and became romantically involved with him. George, who preferred to be called Junior, was a 42-year-old engineer who came from a wealthy Pennsyvlania family. So it sounds like she met him at Bryn Mawr.
Yeah.
Dorothy graduated in 1905 from Bryn Mawr, and after graduating, she came home to live at the family mansion and attempted to begin a career as a writer. Her parents forbade her to continue the relationship with George because they found him unsuitable. Despite her parents' disapproval, Dorothy continued to correspond with George. So in those days, no phones, you kind of wrote letters. So she was writing in romantic letters. Why did the family forbade her to see him?
Well, he was 42 years old.
There you go. Maybe it's that.
Yeah.
Although older men did marry younger women in those days. And it sounds like from a wealthy family.
Yeah. So I don't know.
Maybe it's because they were secretly seeing each other.
Possibly, yeah. But jumping into the timeline again, spring of 1910, so this is 8 months before her disappearance, Dorothy submitted a short story to McClure's magazine, which was rejected. Dorothy's family, who was largely amused by her writing aspirations, teased her about the rejection. This prompted Dorothy to rent a post office box to receive correspondence from magazines and publishing houses.
So that's, not very supportive that the family is not supporting her writing. But again, women in those days were not really working, especially from prominent families. And, she was they probably thought it was silly of her trying to get a writing career.
Right, yeah. So now it's September of 1910. This is 3 months before she vanished. Dorothy lied to her parents and told them she was going to visit a former Bryn Mawr classmate in Boston. Instead, she spent a week in a hotel with George, although the pair stayed in separate hotels. Dorothy's parents found out about the rendezvous after Dorothy pawned $500 worth of jewels to finance their week-long stay. That's a lot of money back then.
That is a lot of money back then. And also, here she is staying in a hotel without an escort, seeing him on the sly, and, it doesn't look good for the family's reputation.
No, not at all.
They don't approve of him, and she sneaks off.
Yeah, so she's sneaking out there with this older man.
Right.
So.
It's in those days, that was very, very looked upon very badly.
Yes.
So now 2 months before she disappeared, Dorothy asked her father if she could take an apartment in Greenwich Village in order to write. Francis Arnold, her father, forbade Dorothy to move out of the family home, telling her that a good writer can write anywhere. And, she didn't have any money of her own, and she lives in an affluent family, so she really didn't have a choice. But if he didn't pay for the apartment, I guess she couldn't.
Right, because she was just out of college, so.
Yes, and back then women didn't get jobs easily, especially if you're affluent. You weren't really supposed to work, and she wanted to do a writing career, a little alternative. So November 1910, this is 1 month before she vanished, she did submit a second short story to McClure's magazine, The Poinsettia and the Flame. That story was also rejected. According to Dorothy's friends, the second rejection left her dejected and embarrassed. Dorothy and George saw each other for a final time in early November, shortly before he left on a vacation to Europe with his parents.
That must have been hard. I mean, you're trying so hard to become a writer.
Yeah, so she's rejected twice.
Yeah.
And now her boyfriend's leaving on vacation and back then they'd go on a ship across to Europe and stay for months at a time. So he's leaving. She can't move out on her own.
Just a lot of kind of negative things going on.
I would think if you had a potential for depression, it may be building at this time.
Right. So now it's December 12th, and this is the day of Dorothy's disappearance. Dorothy departed from her lavish family home at 108 East 79th Street during the morning hours at around 11 a.m. She was dressed in the height of fashion, wearing a tailor-made blue serge suit, a long blue coat, lapis lazuli earrings. I don't know if I'm saying that right, but she had earrings on, and a small black velvet hat lined in pale Alice blue and decorated with 2 silk roses and a lapis lazuli pin. She had approximately $25 to $30 in cash on her, which was valued about $700 to $800 to today.
So that $500 that she took when she met George, that was even amazing.
Thousands,
Yeah, 25 times that amount. So
right.
That's a huge amount of money.
That's actually pretty interesting. $25 back then being around $700 to $800 today.
What it could buy, exactly.
Yeah. So at this time of the year in Manhattan, it was about 30 to 40 degrees in the daytime and in the 20s at night. So it got really chilly.
Yeah, that's all the blue coat and the
hat.
suit. And,
Now, Dorothy was going shopping for a new evening gown to wear to her younger sister's coming out party. Marjorie was 19 and having a debutante party where an upper-class young woman makes her first appearance in fashionable society.
So here's Dorothy, 25 years old, and her 19-year-old sister is coming out to society, and she's not married yet. And in those days, I believe that you were kind of considered an old maid at 25 if you weren't married. Now, she is very liberal, and maybe she doesn't care. But again, maybe that is very hurtful for her that, her sister's coming out.
Right.
And she was excited for the party, but still, it's, it could be.
And she had a lot going on. I mean, the whole, again, writing thing being rejected, her boyfriend leaving town.
It seems to be building.
Yeah. So now it was the holiday season in New York and also a time for festivities, galas, and balls. Dorothy's mother offered to accompany her that morning, but Dorothy said she wanted to go alone. This was not unusual because her mother was thought to be in poor health.
So as Dorothy stepped out into the street, we have a little audio clip of what it sounded like. The horses, the carriages, the cable cars, everything commingling. It's a busy, exciting city at that time. And it looks somewhat the same in many ways as it does today. The road patterns are the same and some of the buildings still exist. In most cases, people walked everywhere, as we talked about. The sidewalks were wider and always busy. Some sidewalks were as wide as 2 car lanes. The streets were primarily for people, not cars, and it was the beginning of the invasion of the automobile as wealthy families began to get chauffeured around town. Everyone seemed to be dressed up and wearing hats.
Dorothy walked to 5th Avenue and turned south. 5th Avenue runs along Central Park until the end of the park on 59th Street. Millionaires lived in luxury mansions along 5th Avenue. She continued to 27th Street, walking almost 3 miles from her home. Several acquaintances stopped and spoke with her as she walked west along 5th Avenue. They all said that she seemed cheerful. So 3 miles, I mean, back then, though, they were walking everywhere, basically.
They didn't have gymnasiums. That's how they got their exercise. It wasn't unusual to walk. You didn't have a lot of choices except to get in a carriage, a horse-drawn carriage, and now the automobile is coming out. But also, it's entertainment. Walking down the streets,
talking
seeing
to people,
your neighbors, rubbing elbows. You live in a prominent area. You walk along Central Park, look at the mansions across the street. It must be, I would use that as entertainment and find it really enjoyable.
Right.
No TV, nothing else
exactly,
to do.
Yeah. Now, her first stop was at Park and Tilford's, which is a candy store. Dorothy had charged a half-pound box of chocolates to her account on the Arnold family credit. The clerk said that she was very carefree.
She went on to a bookstore called Britannia's in that same area. She bought a book called Engaged Girl Sketches, and it's a book of humorous essays by Emily Calvin Blake. Again, she made the purchase on the Arnold family credit, so that's a nice that she has that
I know, yeah,
opportunity
just
to
charge it on there.
charge away. At the bookstore, she had a chance encounter with a friend. They chatted for a few minutes before Dorothy left the establishment. Friends who ran into her outside of the bookstore said that they noticed nothing unusual about her.
Outside the bookstore, Dorothy ran into a female friend named Gladys King. King recalled that the two spoke briefly about Marjorie's upcoming debutante party and that Dorothy seemed to be in good spirits. King then excused herself to meet her mother for lunch at the Waldorf-Astoria. King recalled that Dorothy told her she was going to walk home through Central Park. King last saw Dorothy on 27th Street at 1:45 p.m. when she turned to wave goodbye for a second time.
So she was still in the same area as a bookstore. She told her friend that she was going to walk in Central Park, but she didn't mention that she was supposed to have lunch with her mom at the Waldorf-Astoria. Now, in those days, did people eat lunch a little later? It's 1:45. She didn't get out till 11, so I think New York City still has that kind of habit of eating later.
Right.
And so she
The
probably
nightlife.
could have been going to lunch or just told her friend she was going for a walk. But if you look at the map, why would she walk all the way back to Central Park, which is a couple of miles, and then all the way back to the Waldorf-Astoria?
Yeah.
Because the Waldorf-Astoria back then is where the Empire State Building is today. So it
Right.
was still in that general area where she was at the candy store and the bookshop. So that's a bit confusing as to really what her intentions were.
Now, Dorothy was on one of the busiest street corners in the world at this time. Hundreds of people surrounded her on that bleak winter morning, and yet no one saw anything.
And she was well known in the community.
Yeah, I mean, they were a pretty wealthy family.
And with all those people, how do you go missing?
Exactly. And just so you guys listening know what we're kind of talking about, this hotel that she's supposed to meet her mom at for lunch was the original Waldorf-Astoria hotel. It was very extravagant, and originally it was two former Astor family mansions. Then it was built as separate hotels in the early 1890s on the site of the mansions. The two hotels were combined in 1897, and this hotel was the largest in the world, and it was a gathering place for the rich and ostentatious and the first to allow unchaperoned women.
So you went there to be seen, and also if you could afford it. And as again, a reminder, it was where the Empire State Building is today. So she was in that general area.
Dorothy was not seen purchasing the dress that she spoke of, so it can be assumed that either she lied or she was stopped in some way before she could fulfill her plans. And that evening, when Dorothy failed to return home for dinner, her family grew very suspicious. Dorothy's parents did not initially worry when she did not return home that evening. They assumed she was spending the night with a friend.
So it sounds like it was common for her maybe to live a little independently while in the mansion.
Yeah, I mean, she is 25. I know back then it was a little bit different, but I didn't think one night away they would start become suspicious of anything.
She wanted her own flat in Greenwich Village, her own apartment.
True, yeah.
So she was already seeking out independence. And, why didn't she buy the dress? I thought that was the whole purpose why she was out there that day.
She had her sister's party
The
coming up.
debutante
Yeah.
party was coming out party, and you've got to find a dress and then get it altered in those days.
Right, but
and can
instead-
you find a dress easily?
Right. But she was buying chocolates, and then she went to a bookstore.
She was not on task, was
No.
she? And she didn't meet her mom for lunch like she said she would.
Which all of this is odd, but everyone else who saw her that day is saying that nothing was
She
out
was
of
in good
Yeah.
spirits.
So it's like she maybe planned something.
She's
or
planning something, and so she's feeling light and airy and happy about that. And she was known to go off and tell her parents a lie and stay with her boyfriend in separate hotels, but
Right.
go off on a little rendezvous.
when she pawned the jewels off. Yeah.
So she may have had something up her sleeve, but would you go buy a book and chocolates before you're going to do something like that?
I know, that's kind of strange.
So on December 13th, 1910, this is the second evening, when she didn't come home, her parents became really concerned. By the early evening, Dorothy had failed to return home for dinner. She didn't usually miss dinner with the family. They began calling Dorothy's friends to find her whereabouts, but no one had seen her. Shortly after midnight on December 13th, the same day, Elsie Henry, one of Dorothy's friends, phoned the family home to see if Dorothy had returned. Elsie later said Dorothy's mother, Mary, answered the telephone and told her that Dorothy had returned home. When Elsie asked to speak to Dorothy, Mary hesitated and told Elsie that Dorothy had gone to bed with a headache.
This is so strange to me. I mean, your daughter's not home, but you're telling her friend that she is.
The only thing I'm thinking is they're embarrassed. They're
True.
social standing. They're on the social register. This is New York City. Is she didn't want the cat out of the bag, telling people that, maybe it would get to the press or something. Right. So Dorothy's home, but yet it's going to get out.
Exactly,
They called looking for her.
So now the family, fearing that their daughter's disappearance would draw unwanted media attention and could become socially embarrassing, the Arnold family did not report Dorothy's disappearance to the police for weeks. I mean, weeks went by without knowing where your daughter was, and you didn't report it.
Again, social embarrassment.
Yeah, now people of high social position like the Arnolds never called the police or informed the newspapers of their troubles. They were afraid of negative publicity.
That concludes part 1 of the Dorothy Arnold story.
And tune in next week to hear part 2 about how Dorothy went missing in 1910 in the middle of New York City in broad daylight. Thank you guys so much for listening.
Thank you.